All right, so where were we? We were here. We have our app. I'm not streaming my screen to the projector. Cast my desktop to the projector TV. Cool. So we have our team component, and we put a bunch of them on the page, and we're rendering, and we can add points, and we can subtract points. Let's talk about a couple of things that if you are a conscientious developer and you leave your console open and you're looking at this error thing that I said you should be on alert for, you want to keep these away, right? The best thing you can do is keep this at 0 or gone, right? No red errors in the console. So let's take a look at what these errors are in our console and see if we can fix them. So we're getting this warning and saying there's an invalid DOM property, class. Did you mean class name on an H2 in our team.js on line 26? Right here. So this is one of the annoying things people are going to find about React is that when we are defining this HTML, we can use these properties like class that come from HTML, but React is really generating DOM elements. And in DOM elements, if we were changing the class, we would call this class name. If you were writing JavaScript, and maybe some of you did this when you were doing plain JavaScript, you would say like, my h2 dot class name equals something. Right? That's how we would change the class in JavaScript. So the proper way of doing this without getting any errors in our code is all of these classes really need to be class names. So past versions of React would complain about this and ignore your class settings. The latest version of React will allow us to use class. It'll just give us warnings. So the proper way is to change those classes to class names. Now it's telling me that my label, this 4, is really HTML, is really HTML4. That's really what the JavaScript DOM attribute name is, right? And now I don't have any errors on my page. So just as you're writing your React code, be looking at that console and trying to resolve the various errors that you get.
I have 2 other errors. One says something about char set and the give body or message body.
Yeah, we can take a look at those in a second.
Okay.
It's also telling me this logo is no longer used, so I can get rid of that logo variable. And everything is now clean. No errors. This is where we kind of want to stay as best we can. It's going to be that sometimes you're going to get warnings of things that we can't control, but anything that's red should be kind of making the hair on the back of your neck stand up and be on the lookout for them. So let's talk now about these buttons. You notice that before we added these classes here just to have access to JavaScript so we could add event listeners. Well, we actually don't need these classes anymore because they're actually not doing anything for us. We're not using CSS, so we can get rid of these classes. We can probably also get rid of the class on our section. And we can get rid of the class name on our p tag because we're not using that anymore for JavaScript. And eventually, we're not going to use this class name for JavaScript for this update button. Pretty much, we're going to end up not using classes here for identifying things for JavaScript anymore because React is going to let us apply listeners on these elements on our own. So all those classes that we used to have on here just for our JavaScript can go away. Let's work next on allowing ourselves to come in here to this input type the name of a team and hit update. So let's change our app a little bit. Rather than just pass a team number, let's pass the team name. So we're going to change team number to team name and have the team be the entire name of the team. And then in our code here, let's just have the team name to be displayed. So now if we wanted to, right, we could make these whatever we want. Right, we can start them out as to whatever we want. SDG All-Stars, Chord XI, Chord XII, staff. But we know we're going to change these, right? We want the ability to change the name of this team. So that means this has got to become not this.team name, this.props team name, this.state team name. Which means that up here, when we create this component, we need a team name. Let's initialize it with the team name we get from our props. Right. So we take the props that come in and assign it to our team name state, and then use team name state inside of our component. So down here, we have this input. We don't need this ID anymore, necessarily. We're going to get rid of the HTML4, just to simplify this a little bit. Chris, was that a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is have the name of the team in here, so that, right, if we're just going to change one letter, we don't have to retype the entire thing. Right? I want this to say SDG All-Stars as well. So in addition to this being input type text, we can put the value of this to be this.state.team name. And now the input, maybe a little hard to read, let's make this a little bigger. Now the team name is in here as well. Cool, right? Let's come in and change it. Let's come in here and type H-E-L-L what? H-E, I'm trying to type in here and nothing's happening. And I'm typing in this input box and nothing is happening. Anybody have a theory why? Why can I not, as I type in here, no matter what I type, it keeps putting back SDG All-Stars? Say it a little louder. Yeah, that is exactly right. The value is set to this.state.team name. So every time this component repaints itself, every time I type something, the input says, the value is just this.state.team name. So the only way I can change what's inside of this input is to change what's inside of this.state.team name. So in order to do this, I need a function here. Right? I need an onChange function, this.update team name. Right, let's make a onChange for a function update team name. Update team name is going to be a function. I'm going to need the event. Right? In these other places, I left the event out. Right? As a habit, we probably just want to put the event in here. You might need it. So if here's the event, let's console.log the event target. So the event is what happened. It's the object that the user interface sends us that says, hey, something happened. The target is the attribute of the event that the thing happened to. So the event target in this case should be, if we're console logging this should be our input box. So if we're in our console and I highlight all this and I type in X, aha, our event target is our input box. And if I ask it for its value, I should get the new value of what I typed in. So if I make this an X, I see an X. Right? But React snaps the user interface back to SDG All-Stars because that's what's in state. Oh, right, I get this. So what this means is, in here I have to say this.setState team name is what? Whatever's inside of that input box, which is given by event target value. The event is what happened, target is who it happened to, and I'm asking for the value of the input, and I'm changing the team name. X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3. Wow, look at that. They both change. SDG All-Stars are great. In order to change an input, if I make the input value a state variable, I have to have a function that changes it. What do you think would happen if I did this? Yeah. No matter what I type, I'm typing in lowercase, but my input is automatically changing to uppercase, and so is my value. Right? I'm typing a lowercase x, y, z, 1, 2, 3. Right? But you can see that I'm console logging the value, and then next time when I'm console logging the value, it's capital X, because the 2 uppercase converts my input to capital, and it's putting that in the state. It's kind of silly, but the point is, whatever I change this to is what becomes the name. And also notice that just like all these others, right, they have their own copy right? They all have their own copy of that team name state. So as I change it, it's only changing the one that I care about. Right?
When we add a bit in between different equal signs,
Mhm.
what does that do?
So this is the argument to this function.
Okay.
So event comes into this function, and since this is a function that's being called by the browser when an update is happening, right? Like the input is changing or a button is clicked, the browser is passing us this event object, and then we're using it to pull information from. So this is an argument to a function. The browser sends us, you can call it whatever you want, but it's an event, so I use the event variable. It's kind of what everybody calls that variable. So now we have the ability to add scores and subtract scores and change the name of the team. Right? And since I'm changing the state, wherever I use this .state.team name, that team name is reflected. It's a little bit of extra work to do, but now no matter where I use that team name, it's updated. What will eventually happen is you'll probably use, if you have very complex forms, there are some React libraries for helping manage forms, so this boilerplate of changing the state kind of goes away. But for now, it's a one-liner, this set state to change the name of the team. Any questions on that? The same thing would happen if we were using radio buttons or a drop-down. Right? All of those things will work a similar way. I'm going to paste an article into your homework tonight that kind of describes this, and it shows examples for radio buttons and drop-downs and all the other types of inputs that you might deal with.
Can I see your app.js?
The app.js looks like this. Good thing, because this is where we're going next. Here's our app.js. We're passing in a team name and an initial score. And in our team constructor, we're taking those props and we're putting them into the score and the team name.
I'm getting
Yeah, because I took out here, I took out the word team. So your H2, and this class name can go away as well. We don't need this class name anymore either because we're not using the class to identify it. Okay, so your H2 just has this.state.team name in it.
When you change class to class name or whatever, how do you know, or how do you remember that you didn't have some kind of CSS connected to that?
That doesn't matter. So there's two. You're actually asking two different questions. If I want to apply, let's say I want to apply a class to this H2 and style it here in my CSS. So let's put a class in here called red text. Right? So let's say I want to apply that class to the H2 and the P. If this were plain CSS, we would do this, right? We would say like so, right? And we get the text as red. But if we're looking in the console, React is telling us, cool, I can do that. But in React, what you really want to do is you want to use the keyword class name, the property class name. So instead of just saying class equals, I use class name equals. So in week 1, we taught you class equals for assigning classes to elements. In React, you just change that to class name with a capital N. So everywhere in HTML you used to type class in your HTML, in React you type class name.
Okay.
It will work without it, but it'll just throw a lot of warnings in the console.
I guess I thought you made that up, which is why.
Yeah, this is how you write classes, the use of a class in React. Now, the reason why I got rid of all these classes was because I did not need them for styling. If you look in the index CSS, there's no classes in here, it's just elements. So I'm not using classes for styling. The reason why the classes were in here was so that we could hook onto them from JavaScript. So we could do query selector in JavaScript. And we don't do query selector anymore when in React. If I want to put an onClick on something, I just find the element I want to click on and I say onClick. So what we find now is in React, you're probably only using classes for styling. And that's really nice. We're not putting extra classes on things just so we can manipulate them with JavaScript. But when we do have classes, we use class name.
Okay.
Let's talk about one other place you might be seeing errors. Let's come back here to the app, and let's kind of do what we did with the articles, and let's put an array called teams, and let's convert this team repeated into a map. So let's make an array of objects. We have a team name and an initial score. And let's just repeat these. Team name is cohort xi, and the initial score was 42, and the team name is cohort xii, and the initial score is 3. Oops. And the team name is cohort, no, staff. What we said? Staff. And the initial score is 5. So here's our object. So now what we can do is in some JavaScript, we can say, let's take teams and map each team into a team component where the team name is team.teamName and the initial score is team.initialScore. And this will reformat nicely, I think. Oops. What do I have? Oh, and I'm missing a closing.
Initial score is spelled wrong in that.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Initial score. In 2 different ways I misspelled it.
Still spelled wrong in front.
Wow. There we go. Did we get it? We got it. Yay. Let's see if we can reformat this a little bit. Nope. Okay. So here we go. Now I can get rid of all these hard-coded teams, and now I just have an object that I can use. But you'll notice I'm getting an error, right? I'm getting a warning. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key property. Check the render method of app on line 31. So I didn't get this error before when I explicitly gave teams, but I'm getting it now. So remember when I said React knows that I can just go in and snipe a particular part of the HTML to replace it? It doesn't replace the entire component or the entire page every time. It's because React can keep track of what elements on the page match up with what components. When we declare the teams this way, it's really easy for React to remember that SDG All Stars comes first and Cohort XI comes next and Cohort XII comes after that, because we told it explicitly what order it came in. When you use map or an iterator to generate components, you need to teach React the order. It can't automatically figure out what the order is. So what it's telling us is when you generate an array of components, you have to supply it a key that uniquely identifies that team versus all of the others, so that React can keep track of them. Because what if one of them goes away? What if we were to suddenly delete one of these teams from the array, right? Then when this repaints, we'd have one less team. So we need to provide right inside of here an attribute called key equal to something that's unique for that element. What could we use, if anything?
Index.
Yeah, we're going to end up using an index. Because the team name is not unique, because we can change it. And the initial score is not unique, because that could change as well. So we have to add on to here an index. So luckily, map gives us the value and an index. And we can have the key be an index. Now, React doesn't complain anymore. So just recognize that when you're using map to generate components in React, you probably want to map the element and the index. You want both of those arguments to the map. And then you're going to set the key equal to an index. Now, if your data had a unique value, like maybe the team has some kind of ID, or maybe your API gives you back an index value, then you don't need the index from that map. You can just use the index from the data. So just recognize you should be looking for those kinds of warnings in your console and working to remove them. So the way we removed this warning was we added a key, and then we said, hey map, give me both the team and the index into the array that that team sits at, 0, 1, 2, 3. And we just tell React, hey, the key for SDG All-Stars is 0, the key for Cohort XI is 1, the key for Cohort 12 is 2, and the key for staff is 3. And then React's like, okay, I can keep track of those now. All right, and everything still works the same way, except we don't have any more warnings. Make sense? All right, it'll work without it, but what will happen is you'll get some weird bugs from time to time.
So index is selecting all the different teams?
Nope. So what's happening in here is, remember that if we have, let's go play with this in the console for a second. Let's grab this team. Let's go into our node console for a second. So here's our teams. Right, teams are this array. If I say teams map, let's turn the team into the team name to uppercase. Oh, team.team name. Right, we can map that way. But what we also get, if we add 2 arguments inside of our map, we also get each element from the array and the index where that element was in the array. So let's just make a little interpolated string. At index 0, we find SDG All-Stars. At index 1, we find cohort XI. So that index is just the index in the array where that element came from.
You have to use the word index?
Nope. Taco Tuesday.
Okay. So it automatically knows that that represents the
Yep.
index.
If we were to go online and go to DevDocs, and we would look at the Java, well, every once in a while their CSS has been going away. If we go into DevDocs, I like to use it on my desktop app anyway. And we were to look at JavaScript map. Map? Nope. We want the array map. JavaScript array map. Really? Array map. There it is. Right? So it tells you down here the parameters are a callback function, and that function actually takes 3 arguments. The current value being processed by the array, an optional index, and the entire array. So what's actually true of map is it takes 3 things. Right? Right? It takes 3 things. We often only use 1. We often only end up using just the current element. So JavaScript is nice. If we don't need those extra arguments, we don't have to ask for them. JavaScript is like, okay, you didn't need those other 2 arguments. I won't bother giving them to you. But just know that they're there if you want them. So you can also get the index. The first thing will be the element from the array, 1 at a time. The second argument would be where it was in the array. And the third argument, if you take it, is the actual array, if for some reason you need it. So this is why when we turn this into a map and we needed the key, we're going to ask for each team 1 at a time and where it was in the array. Before we didn't need the index when we're having the error, right? If we don't have this line, then we don't need the index. We can get rid of it, right? And we just end up with team. But if we do this, right, we're going to end up with the error. So we need the team and the index. So now we need parentheses around it because we have 2 arguments. And we'll make the key the index. And then our errors go away. Question?
Are you saying that's keeping the order?
Yeah. Yeah, it's training React to say, I know how to identify this team versus this team versus this team versus this team. The reason being is, let's do this. Let's add a button. Let's do this. I don't want to because we've got just a few minutes and I want to show you the homework. With a little bit more work, we could add a button here to delete a team. And if we deleted this team from the array and we were to redraw it, it wouldn't know which team we deleted, right? When we wrote the teams explicitly, React could know which team was which, right? When we deleted that from the HTML. But if we just get rid of one of these from the array, well, there used to be 4 elements in the array. Now there's only 3 elements in the array. Without a key, it can't do that fast update. It has to repaint everything. It's like, I don't know, something went away. I don't know which one went away. So I'm just going to repaint everything. So it will work without the key, but it might be slow. So by adding the key, it can go back and say, well, I used to have 0, 1, 2, 3, but now I'm missing this element. So I'm only going to repaint the ones that I need. So let's say we deleted index number 2, right? Index 0 and 1 don't have to be redrawn, but 2 and 3 do. So it'll only redraw a part of the array. So the key doesn't, by missing the key, you're just losing some efficiency. if this had a unique element like, let's add an ID here. Maybe these things have some internal ID, right? Cohort 11, and this has an ID of cohort 12, and this has an ID of staff. If there was some data inside of each of these teams that was unique, or we're saying this ID means it's this particular team, then we don't have to use the index. We could use the team ID. That's unique enough. And if that were true, then we can get rid of this. We can get rid of this index stuff, and we just use that team ID. That's unique enough. So what eventually will happen when we're pointing at the database, one of the things the database will return to us is which row of the database it is. This is row 26. This is row 145. And probably that will become things like our keys, because they'll be unique, right? If you think back to the Octadex, what would have been unique for that OctoCAD? Its number, right? And that came from the API. So if you go back and look at your Octadex and you're using map, you're getting those errors. Maybe go back and add a key being the cat number, and then that error will go away. Right? Cool. So let's look at what your homework is for tonight. Oh my goodness. So your homework for tonight is going to involve working with state. So your homework for tonight is you're going to build a crypto tracker. Let's find it in here where it's formatted nicer. Your handbook for tonight, not fundamentals, is going to be a crypto tracker. You know what? No. Actually, let's not do crypto tracker. Let's do the color picker. Because the color picker doesn't involve the API. We're going to do what was the assignments? Did I pass it? Assignments, you're going to do the color picker. So this is going to be your homework for tonight. So you're going to build a color picker. I'm going to skip over this bit about, you're going to build something that looks like this. You're going to build a user interface that's going to have 4 sliders. Explorer mode is just 3. So we talked a little bit earlier. We talked the other day about when we were doing hexadecimal numbers, how that makes up RGB, 0 to 255 as color. There's also another way of representing colors is hue, saturation, and lightness. There's also CMYK and a bunch of other color space describing systems. But we have hue, saturation, and lightness. And as we adjust these, we're kind of changing what this color is. So you've probably seen where you're making background styles or background colors. You'd be doing like RGB and 3 numbers or hashmark FF7735, right? There you're setting an amount of red between 0 and 255, amount of green between 0 and 255, and how much blue between 0 and 255. Here, what we're representing is a hue value, a saturation value, and a lightness, right? Where the hue runs between 0 and 100, I think. I always get that. Nope. Hue runs between 0 and 360 because it's the color wheel, right? So we are on the color wheel, are you? The saturation is how much. So between gray, like not much of that color, to 100% being all of that color. And then lightness being on the scale from black to white. So you might want to find like an example color app to play with, but this is what we're going to be building, right? You're going to have 3 sliders in your app. The alpha is the transparency. That's going to be for adventure mode. But for basic explorer mode, you're going to have 3 sliders. And as you move the slider, you're going to be changing the hue. You're going to be changing the saturation. And you're going to be changing the lightness. Then for this box over here, you're going to be updating its style. So you see here we have an inline style because the style is going to be computed. And I think, Shay, you ran into this the other day with a style in your React app that we had to take out. So when you do inline styles, you are making, and these are two braces. The first brace is the React interpolation brace. And the second brace is an object brace. So this is saying the style for this div is going to be interpolated. It's going to be a React value. And it's going to be an object. And then the keys are our CSS values, and their values are what you want to set them to. So you see here, we're making our background color an HSL of 58% and 20%. But as we change that amount of H, of that amount of hue, this number has to change. As we change saturation, that number has to change. And as we change lightness, that number has to change. We're going to represent the 3 values, hue, saturation, and lightness, in your state, because they change. Right? As we're dragging hue, we're changing that hue, so it has to be in the state. Make 3 sliders that update their respective values, hue, saturation, lightness, in the state when they're changed. And then display the color on the screen, both in text. So somewhere on your page, you should be showing the HSL as text and the actual color of that box as the element. So in all things, I recommend starting out in the beginning, drawing this out in HTML. Right? Get all of the formatting you want. Your sliders may not look as cool as that. You should go look up, is there an input type that is a slider? Right? It won't be the same. Actually kind of tells you right at the top, use a range input type. Instead of type text, an input box, use a range, and you'll get a slider. If you want to dive deep into CSS, see if you can figure out how to style them, but don't waste time on that. Right? Just make a slider that works. So build something that just has a hue, saturation, and lightness, and a slider you can move back and forth. And then figure out how you're going to hook up state. Right? It's kind of giving you a hint that you're going to have 3 elements in your state, a hue, saturation, and lightness. And as you drag this hue, you want to update the state. And if you set the style of whatever this div is here to an HSL that represents that hue, saturation, and lightness, it should change its color. For adventure mode, add a 4th style for alpha. But you're going to have to put some kind of pattern behind your element so you can see it, right? Because as the transparency of that element changes, you want to see something behind it. You know, put a picture behind that element, right? Kind of like this one, right? And then only display the output color in HSLA, hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha, if the alpha value is less than 1. In epic mode, initialize the state to a random color when the page is loaded, and add a button that picks a new random color. Right? So start with this. Lay this out in plain HTML before you start trying to do any kind of React state stuff. Then make your state. Have these different sliders as they update and change. Change your state. And then tie that state to this background color of this div, and you'll have a color slider. Right? So it's just practicing updating state. So the scoreboard's a good reference for this. Right? It probably works a little bit more like the input box does than the add and subtract, but the concepts are the same. So I would say first thing, between now and 2, work on getting your HTML laid out and do some CSS playing. And then if you start working on state, right, we can answer questions about how to make this work when we get together at 2. Oh, and then remind me, Shay, that you wanted to see how today's Code War worked. So remind me at 2, we're going to do that as well. Any questions on the homework? Any questions yet from what we talked about today, other than like it's totally confusing? This assignment will help you like reinforce how the state works. This is a good one to kind of practice when things change. How does React update state? Toby?
That verbiage up above, that's kind of an explanation of how it started.
This is kind of an explanation of what colors mean. It kind of explains what HSL is, right? It just kind of talks about the difference between RGB colors that we've been using so far and HSL colors that we're not yet familiar with. So if you're kind of curious about how color works on the web, I would say read this intro. Probably read the intro anyway. It's interesting stuff. And there's a link here to how the HSL color space works. If you want to like dive in deeper, how HSL works. And then I will find a good website that implements an HSL slider so you can kind of see if yours is working. And then build HTML. Cool. All right. I will make sure the videos are uploaded and posted. It's going to take a little bit longer.